There are warriors in the Imperium of man who have walked through 10,000 years of history, who have witnessed the galaxy's transformation from the bright promise of the Great Crusade to the grim darkness of the 41st Millennium. These are not men who sleep away the centuries in comfortable ignorance. They are the Dreadnoughts, entombed in walking sarcophagi of adamantium and ceramite, their broken bodies kept alive through technology that borders on the miraculous and the horrific in equal measure. And among these ancient warriors, there exists a particular silence that has endured for 10 millennia, a refusal to speak of certain things, certain moments, certain betrayals that shattered not just armies, but the very foundations of what they believed the universe to be. When you ask a Heresy-Era dreadnought about the battles they fought, they will speak. When you inquire about the tactics employed on distant worlds, the strategies of legendary commanders, the glory of the Great Crusade as it pushed outward into the dark, they will share their wisdom freely. These ancient ones serve as living libraries of warfare, their memories containing knowledge that could fill entire data vaults. But there is one thing they will not do. They will not describe what it felt like when brother turned against brother in the Istvan system. They will not put into words the sensation of watching their primarchs, their gene fathers, their living gods, raise weapons against one another in earnest. They will not speak of the moment when the foundations of their reality crumbled beneath them, like sand castles before a tide. This is not forgetfulness. These are not warriors whose memories have faded with time, though time has certainly taken its toll on their organic components. This is not the confusion of damaged minds, though many dreadnoughts do suffer from the psychological strain of their extended existence. This is choice. This is deliberate silence. This is a wound so deep that even 10,000 years has not begun to heal it. A trauma so profound that language itself seems inadequate to contain it. And to understand why they won't speak of it, we must first understand what it means to be a dreadnought, what the heresy took from them, and what burdens they carry in the darkness between their rare awakenings. The life of a dreadnought pilot is not what the propaganda suggests. When a space marine falls in battle, wounded beyond even the considerable capabilities of their enhanced biology and the skills of their apothecaries, there exists a final option for those deemed worthy. Internment within a dreadnought chassis is presented as the highest honor, a chance to continue serving the Emperor beyond the mortal limits of flesh. The reality is far more complex and infinitely more terrible. The process of internment is not salvation, but transformation, a fundamental alteration of what it means to exist as a thinking, feeling being. It begins with a body shattered beyond recognition, organs liquefied, bones reduced to fragments, flesh burned or torn, until there is barely enough left to sustain consciousness. The tech marine who perform the internment are not gentle surgeons offering comfort to the dying. They are mechanics working against impossible odds, racing to preserve whatever fragments of life remain within the ruined meat that was once a warrior. They cut away everything that cannot be saved, which is nearly everything. They extract what remains of the brain, portions of the spinal column, perhaps a few vital organs, if any have survived intact. These biological fragments are suspended in nutrient fluids within an armored sarcophagus, a life support system that will maintain them indefinitely through means that toe the line between technology and dark miracle. Cables burrow into neural tissue, synthetic connections replace natural ones. The warrior's consciousness, his sense of self, his ability to perceive and interact with the world, all of this is rerouted through machine interfaces that will never feel quite natural, never quite right. And then comes the first awakening, when the newly interred opens eyes that are now optical sensors, tries to speak with a voice that is now a voxcaster's mechanical rasp, attempts to feel anything at all through a body that is tons of ceramite and adamantium instead of flesh and blood. Some adjust quickly, finding purpose in their new form. Others take longer, struggling with the loss of sensation, the absence of taste and touch, and the thousand small physical experiences that define existence. and some never truly adjust at all, spending their entire extended lives fighting against the prison they can never escape, the metal tomb that keeps them simultaneously alive and dead, serving and suffering in equal measure. During the Great Crusade and the early years of the Horus Heresy, dreadnought patterns were more sophisticated than those that would survive into the 41st millennium. The Contemptor pattern, with its atomantic shielding and advanced targeting systems, represented the pinnacle of the technology. The massive Leviathan pattern, built for siege warfare and equipped with weapons that could level fortifications, stood taller and more imposing than even standard dreadnoughts. The Dreadnought pattern provided heavy fire support with weapon systems that would be lost to later ages. These were not the crude boxes of later millennia, but elegant war machines that moved with surprising grace. Their pilots interfaced with systems that, while still horrific, at least functioned with some degree of sophistication. But regardless of the pattern, regardless of the technological marvels that supported them, the fundamental horror remained the same. A warrior's body was gone, replaced by machinery. Their existence had been reduced to a brain floating in synthetic fluids, experiencing the world through sensors and actuators, unable to sleep naturally, unable to feel warmth or cold or pain or pleasure in any way their former flesh would have recognized. It is into this state of being, this half-life between man and machine, that the betrayal came. And to understand why these ancient warriors will not speak of what that betrayal felt like, we must first understand what was betrayed and how completely it shattered the universe as they knew it. The Istvan system became the grave of innocence for the Space Marine legions. It was here that Warmaster Horus, the Emperor's most favored son, the chosen commander of all the Imperium's military might, revealed the full scope of his treachery. But the betrayal did not come all at once. It unfolded in stages, each more devastating than the last, each revealing new depths of duplicity that seemed impossible until the moment they became horrifyingly real. The first blow fell on Istvan III, where the local planetary governor had declared independence from the Imperium. 4 legions were dispatched to bring the world back into compliance: the Sons of Horus, the Death Guard, the Emperor's Children, and the World Eaters. What the loyalist elements of these legions did not know was that their primarchs had already chosen Horus over the Emperor, had already begun walking the dark path that would lead them to damnation. The loyalists were sent to the surface in the first wave of the assault. Hand-picked squads from across 4 legions, warriors who had proven themselves in countless battles, who had earned the respect and trust of their brothers. They were told it was an honor to lead the attack, to be the spearhead that would bring Istvan III back into imperial compliance. Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children, Captain Garviel Loken of the Sons of Horus, those who would soon rename themselves the Lunar Wolves in rejection of their Primarch's corruption, and thousands of other loyal servants of the Emperor descended to the planet's surface, expecting a standard compliance action. What they received instead was death from above in the form of life-eater virus bombs, weapons so horrific that their use was restricted to the most extreme circumstances. 12 billion human beings died in moments as the virus consumed all organic matter on the planet's surface. Their bodies liquefied, their cells rupturing and dissolving, their dying screams adding to a psychic death cry that echoed across the warp, louder than the Astronomicon itself. And among those billions were thousands of Space Marines, the Emperor's finest warriors, who discovered in their final moments that their own primarchs had ordered their deaths. Some had warning, thanks to those like Tarvitz, who discovered the plot and raced to the surface to spread the alarm. Perhaps 90,000 of the 140,000 loyalists sent to the surface managed to seal themselves in bunkers and underground shelters, their power armor holding back the virus long enough to find sanctuary, but that still meant 50,000 dead. 50,000 warriors who had pledged their lives to the Imperium and to their primarchs, murdered by the very leaders they had sworn to follow. Among those who survived the initial viral bombardment was Huron Fal, a venerable dreadnought of the Death Guard Legion's 2nd Company. He had fought beside his brothers for decades, his ancient chassis a rallying point in countless battles against the enemies of mankind. When the virus bombs fell, he was with Captain Ullis Temeter, trying desperately to save as many warriors as possible. The virus breached Huron Fal's armor, and he knew in that moment that his end had come. But rather than die alone, rather than spend his final moments in the isolation of his sarcophagus, he gathered the dying Temeter in his massive arms and carried him to safety. As the virus consumed what remained of his organic components, as his systems began to fail one by one, Huron Fal made a choice. They would die together, brother with brother, and their death would be one of their own choosing, not at the hands of those who had betrayed them. His final words echoed down through history. This death was theirs, not Horus's, to give. The dreadnought ancient Rylanor of the Emperor's children also found himself on Istvan III, having switched places with Captain Tarvitz before the deployment. As the Ancient of Rites for his legion, responsible for overseeing the induction ceremonies that transformed aspirants into full battle brothers, Rylanor had been troubled by the changes he had witnessed in his legion since their exposure to the alien world of Laeran. When the betrayal came, when his own Primarch Fulgrim ordered the death of those deemed insufficiently loyal to Horus's cause, Rylanor survived through a combination of his dreadnaught's resilience and sheer stubborn refusal to die. He would spend the next 10,000 years on that dead world, alone with his rage and his memories, planning a revenge that would ultimately fail, but would leave a permanent scar on Fulgrim's dark soul. But Istvan III was only the beginning. It was the preliminary purge, the removal of loyalist elements from legions that had already chosen to follow Horus into rebellion. The true scope of the betrayal would not become clear until Istvan V, in an event that would become known to history as the Dropsite Massacre, the single most devastating blow struck against the loyalist cause in the entire heresy. When word of the atrocity at Istvan III reached Terra, carried by the survivors aboard the frigate Eisenstein, Rogel Dawn immediately began planning a response. 7 full legions would be dispatched to bring Horus to account, the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard in the first wave, followed by the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Word Bearers, and Alpha Legion in the second wave. Over 100,000 Space Marines, the greatest military force assembled since the Emperor's initial conquest of the galaxy, descended upon Istvan V to crush the rebellion before it could spread. The first wave landed in a location called the Urgol Depression, a volcanic plain where Horus had established his fortifications. Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, driven by rage at the betrayal of his closest brother Fulgrim, led 30 full companies of Morlock Terminators directly at the Emperor's children lines. Vulcan and the Salamanders took the left flank. Corvus Corax and the Raven Guard took the right. 40,000 loyalists against 30,000 traitors, a battle that seemed winnable, difficult, but achievable. They fought with everything they had, pushing forward through traitor defenses, taking casualties, but maintaining momentum. Ferrus Manus himself dueled with Fulgrim, his former friend, his brother in all but blood, the Primarch he had trusted above almost all others. And then the second wave arrived, the supposed reinforcements, the brother legions that had come to ensure victory. And they opened fire on the loyalists. The Iron Warriors, Word Bearers, Night Lords, and Alpha Legion had been Horus's hidden weapons all along, legions that had turned to chaos but had concealed their corruption, that had positioned themselves as reinforcements specifically so they could strike when the loyalists were most vulnerable. Trapped between the traitor legions they had been fighting and the traitor legions that were supposed to be their allies, the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard were slaughtered. Ferrus Manus, distracted by the betrayal of the reinforcements, lost his duel with Fulgrim and was decapitated, his head becoming a trophy for Horus. Vulcan was consumed in a nuclear bombardment by the Iron Warriors. Corvus Corax barely escaped, his legion reduced to perhaps 3,000 survivors out of 80,000 who had made planetfall. The Salamanders and Iron Hands fared even worse, scattered and broken, their command structures shattered. their brotherhood reduced to ash and memory. In 3 hours of concentrated slaughter, Horus eliminated 3 entire loyalist legions as fighting forces and demonstrated to any who might still doubt that this was not a misunderstanding that could be resolved, not a conflict that could be negotiated. This was total war, brother against brother, and it would not end until one side or the other was completely destroyed. The few dreadnoughts who survived the massacre, those ancient warriors who had seen so much in their long service, witnessed something that broke fundamental assumptions about the universe. They saw Space Marines, the Emperor's angels of death, the finest warriors humanity had ever produced, turned into prey, hunted by those who should have been their brothers. They saw Primarchs, those demigod sons of the Emperor, who were supposed to be beyond the petty treacheries of mortal men, engaged in fratricidal combat that served only the dark powers of chaos. Now we come to the heart of the matter, the reason why these ancient warriors, these dreadnoughts who survived the betrayal at Istvan and the long years that followed, will not describe what it felt like. To understand their silence, we must first understand the unique nature of Space Marine psychology and how it differs from baseline human cognition. A Space Marine is not simply a large, strong human in power armor. The process of transformation that creates an Astartes fundamentally alters how an individual processes reality, how they form attachments, how they understand their place in the universe. The gene seed implantation, the hypno-indoctrination, the psycho-conditioning, all of these create warriors who are designed to function beyond normal human emotional responses. They can witness horrors that would break a normal person's mind and continue fighting. They can endure physical agonies that would kill through shock alone and still complete their mission. They are weapons, yes, but they are also men, and they form bonds with their brothers that run deeper than anything most humans will ever experience. The brotherhood between Space Marines is not friendship in any conventional sense. It is not the casual companionship of soldiers who serve together for a few years and then go their separate ways. It is a bond forged through shared genetic material, the gene seed that makes them all sons of their Primarch. It is strengthened through shared suffering in the brutal trials that transform aspirants into full battle brothers. It is reinforced through countless battles where each warrior knows without question that his brothers will stand beside him against any foe, that they will die before they abandon him, that their loyalty to each other is absolute and unbreakable. This bond is what makes the Space Marine legions so effective. A warrior fights harder when he knows his brothers depend on him. He endures greater pain when he understands that giving up means failing those who stand beside him. The brotherhood transcends individual survival instinct and becomes something that approaches the divine, a connection between souls that makes each legionary part of something greater than himself. When that bond is violated, when brother turns against brother, when the absolute trust that defines their existence is revealed to be a lie, the damage is not something that can be easily quantified or described. For a dreadnought, this trauma is compounded by the nature of their existence. They are already isolated within their sarcophagi, already cut off from normal physical and emotional interaction with the world around them. They cannot embrace a brother who offers comfort. They cannot participate in the informal gatherings where warriors process their experiences. They cannot even pace or engage in physical activity to work through their emotional turmoil. They are trapped with their thoughts, with their memories, with the recursive loops of trauma that play endlessly through, minds that cannot sleep in any natural way. Consider the position of a dreadnought who witnessed the betrayal at Istvan V. He sees Space Marines that he has fought beside, perhaps for decades or even centuries, suddenly turn their weapons on warriors from legions that were supposed to be allies. He sees apothecary stations, set up ostensibly to provide medical aid to the loyalist wounded, suddenly transform into butcher's stalls where injured warriors are executed rather than healed. He sees gunships bearing the colors of supposed brother legions rain down weapons of mass destruction on tightly packed formations of loyalists who had believed themselves safe among allies. And through all of this, he experiences it from within the isolation of his dreadnought chassis. unable to process what he's witnessing through normal human channels of grief and rage and incomprehension. The trauma becomes locked inside him, bound up with the very systems that keep him alive, inseparable from his existence in a way that warriors of flesh and blood might never fully experience. The psychological impact is made worse by the nature of dreadnought deployment and storage between battles. Unlike their brothers who can interact socially, who can speak of their experiences and find some measure of catharsis through shared understanding, dreadnoughts spend most of their existence in stasis. They are awakened for battle, fight until the campaign is complete, and then are returned to the deep vaults of their chapter's fortress monastery to sleep away the years until they are needed again. This sleep is not restful. It is a half-death, a state of reduced consciousness where dreams and memories churn through damaged neural tissue, where the barriers between past and present become permeable, where traumatic experiences repeat endlessly without resolution. For a dreadnought who witnessed the betrayal, who carries the memory of that violation within his mind, every period of stasis becomes another opportunity for the trauma to reassert itself, to replay the moment when everything he believed about the universe was revealed to be a comforting fiction. The Leviathan pattern dreadnoughts suffered particularly severe effects from this process. These massive war machines, built for siege warfare and equipped with weapons that could crack fortifications, were also notorious for the strain they placed on their pilots. The little understood mechanisms unique to the Leviathan pattern somehow interacted with the pilot's consciousness in ways that drove many to the edge of madness. Those Leviathans that survived into the 41st millennium are dreaded as much as they are revered, their pilots described as being trapped in dreams of the heresy, their actions in battle determined as much by their tormented recollections as by the commands of their current leaders. Imagine being entombed within such a machine, witnessing the betrayal at Istvan, and then spending the next 10,000 years reliving it in fevered half-dreams every time you are placed in stasis. Imagine having no escape from those memories, no way to process them or move beyond them, locked in an eternal present, where the moment of betrayal is always happening, always fresh, always as devastating as the first time you experienced it. But even standard Contemptor or Castroferum pattern dreadnoughts face their own unique hells when it comes to processing trauma. Consider what happens to memory over the course of millennia. The human brain, even one enhanced by Space Marine gene seed, was not designed to function for 10,000 years. Memories fade, details blur, entire sections of personal history can be lost to the slow degradation of organic neural tissue. For most humans, this is simply part of aging, the natural forgetting that comes with the passage of time. For a dreadnought, it represents the loss of identity itself, the slow erosion of everything that made them who they were before internment. But traumatic memories do not fade the same way. They burn themselves into neural pathways, reinforcing with each recollection, becoming more vivid, even as less emotionally charged memories disappear into the fog of time. A dreadnought who witnessed the betrayal might forget the faces of brothers who fell in earlier campaigns, might lose the details of battles fought during the Great Crusade, might even struggle to remember his own original name. But the moment when brother turned on brother, the instant when the universe revealed itself to be crueler and more senseless than he had ever imagined, that remains crystal clear, as sharp and painful as the day it happened. Bjorn the Fell-Handed provides perhaps the most poignant example of this phenomenon. As the oldest living space marine in the Imperium, having fought beside Lemon Russ during the Great Crusade and the Heresy itself, Bjorn has endured for over 10,000 years. He is awakened only once per century, so that the Space Wolves can learn from his ancient wisdom, can hear stories of their Primarch and the Golden Age before the Heresy tore the Imperium apart. But Bjorn himself has admitted to the toll this extended existence has taken on him. His memories have faded, entire centuries lost to the degradation of his organic components and the trauma of his extended consciousness. He remembers Leman Russ, his gene father, and the Primarch he loved above all others. He remembers the bitterness of being left behind when Russ departed for the Eye of Terror, the rejection he felt at not being included in whatever final mission his Primarch embarked upon. But the details, the small moments that make up a life, those have been largely lost to him. What remains are the major events, the traumatic experiences, the moments of such intense emotional significance that they have burned permanent scars into his mind. When asked about the heresy, Bjorn speaks of tactics and strategies, of battles won and lost, of the military campaigns that defined that terrible age. But he does not speak of what it felt like to see brother legions turn traitor, to watch the galaxy tear itself apart, to understand that the future he had believed in was dying in real time. And this silence is not because he has forgotten. The very fact that he chooses not to speak of it suggests that the memories remain as sharp and painful as ever, but that words are simply inadequate to contain what he experienced. How do you describe the sensation of watching everything you believed in revealed as a lie? How do you convey the feeling of absolute trust being transformed into absolute betrayal? Language is designed to communicate shared experiences, but the Heresy-Era Dreadnoughts experience something that has no true parallel in the lives of those they might speak to, those who came after, who were born into an Imperium that had already been shaped by the heresy, cannot fully understand what was lost because they never knew what existed before. And those who lived through it, who witnessed the betrayal firsthand, are so few and so scattered that they have no one who can truly comprehend what they might try to express. This brings us to one of the fundamental reasons why these ancient dreadnoughts will not speak of what the betrayal felt like. They are protecting those who came after them from knowledge that cannot be unlearned, from an understanding that would fundamentally alter how younger warriors view their existence. The Imperium of the 41st Millennium is built on the myth of the heresy, on the story of Horus's corruption and the Emperor's sacrifice, on the narrative of heroic resistance against overwhelming treachery. This myth serves a purpose. It gives meaning to suffering, provides context for the endless wars that define imperial existence, offers a framework through which to understand why things are the way they are. But the myth is not the truth. The myth is sanitized, simplified, made palatable for consumption by those who need to believe that the universe makes some kind of sense, that there are clear lines between right and wrong, that loyalty and duty are rewarded even if the rewards come only in the afterlife. The truth is messier. The truth is that the betrayal was not clean or simple. It was not as though one day everyone was loyal and the next half the legions had turned traitor. The corruption spread slowly, insidiously, working its way into hearts and minds through whispered promises and reasonable-sounding arguments. Many who followed Horus initially believed they were doing the right thing, that the Emperor had abandoned the Great Crusade for bureaucratic empire building, that the imperial truth was being perverted by those who had never fought on the front lines. Some were corrupted by chaos without fully understanding what they were giving themselves to. Others made conscious choices to embrace darkness because they believed it offered advantages that loyalty could not provide. And many who stayed loyal did so not because of any great moral clarity, but simply because their primarchs remained faithful, because they could not conceive of turning against their gene fathers regardless of what those gene fathers chose to do. For a dreadnought to explain this to a younger warrior, to describe the shades of grey that existed in what has since become a black and white morality tale, would be to undermine the very foundations of what keeps that warrior fighting. If a space marine understands that loyalty does not guarantee righteousness, that brothers can turn against each other for reasons that seem logical in the moment, that even primarchs can fall despite being designed by the Emperor himself as the pinnacle of human achievement, then what does that do to his faith? How can he trust his own brothers absolutely if he knows that absolute trust can be absolutely betrayed? How can he follow orders without question if he understands that those giving orders might themselves be corrupted, might be leading him toward damnation while speaking words that sound like duty and honor? The knowledge that the Heresy-Era dreadnoughts carry is dangerous, not because it is false, but because it is true, and truth without context can be more destructive than any lie. There is also the simple fact that no words exist that could adequately convey what they experienced. Language evolved to describe the human experience, and even enhanced space marine cognition operates within frameworks that assume certain baseline realities. There are words for betrayal, for grief, for rage, for loss, for all the emotions that make up the response to trauma. But none of these words, even combined, even elaborated upon for hours, can truly communicate what it was like to stand on Istvan V and watch 80,000 of your brothers be slaughtered by legions that were supposed to be coming to reinforce them. The magnitude exceeds what language can contain. The violation of trust goes beyond what words like betrayal can convey. The grief is not something that can be processed through normal grieving mechanisms, because it is not grief for individuals, but grief for the death of an entire worldview, an entire understanding of how reality functions. Consider what it means to be absolutely certain of something. Most humans go through life with varying degrees of confidence in their beliefs. They think certain things are probably true, or very likely true, or as close to certain as makes no difference. But absolute certainty, the kind of certainty where doubt is literally inconceivable, is rare. Space Marines lived with that kind of certainty. They were certain that their primarchs were loyal to the Emperor. They were certain that their brother legions shared the same goals and values. They were certain that the Great Crusade was bringing enlightenment and unity to the galaxy. These were not beliefs subject to questioning or doubt. They were fundamental axioms upon which their entire existence was built. When those axioms were revealed to be false, when their primarchs declared for Horus, when their brother legions opened fire on supposed allies, when the Great Crusade transformed into a civil war that would tear the Imperium apart, it was not like discovering you had been wrong about something. It was like discovering that gravity might occasionally reverse itself, that mathematics might sometimes produce different answers to the same equations, that the fundamental laws of reality were negotiable after all. How do you describe that experience to someone who has never known that kind of certainty in the first place? How do you explain the sensation of having absolute faith shattered to someone who was raised in an imperium where faith is already understood to be a matter of will rather than evidence? The younger generations know that chaos exists, that primarchs can fall, that betrayal is always possible. They live in a universe where paranoia is justified, where trust must be carefully rationed, where the Inquisition monitors even the most loyal servants for signs of corruption. They have never known the innocent certainty that defined the Great Crusade, and so they cannot understand what was lost when that certainty died. For a Heresy-Era Dreadnought to try to explain this would be like a sighted person trying to describe color to someone who has been blind from birth. The fundamental experiential framework is missing, and without it, the explanation becomes meaningless. Then there is the question of what speaking about the betrayal might unleash, both in the speaker and in those who hear the testimony. Trauma that is carefully contained, locked away in the depths of a mind that has learned to function despite carrying it, can become destabilizing when brought into conscious awareness and articulated. Therapists in our own time understand this phenomenon. Sometimes speaking about traumatic experiences is essential for healing, but the timing matters, the context matters, the support structures available afterward matter. A dreadnought has none of these things. If he speaks of the betrayal, truly speaks of it, rather than offering the sanitized tactical reports that are expected of him, he risks triggering a cascade of emotional responses that he has no healthy way to process. The rage might become uncontrollable, transforming him from a disciplined warrior into a raving berserker who cannot distinguish friend from foe. The grief might overwhelm him, leaving him catatonic within his sarcophagus, unable to function even when duty calls. The despair might drive him to actively seek destruction in battle, throwing himself against impossible odds, not in service to any tactical objective, but simply to end an existence that has become unbearable. We have seen this happen. The Space Wolves have a dreadnought called Murderfang, a warrior who has gone completely feral from the Ma'alm, combination of trauma and isolation. He is awakened only when the chapter needs pure, unthinking violence, deployed like a biological weapon that attacks everything in its path. The moment the immediate threat is eliminated, he is placed back in stasis before he can turn on his own brothers. This is what can happen when a dreadnought's control fails, when the careful compartmentalization that allows them to function breaks down. Murderfang is a warning of what could happen to other ancients if they allowed themselves to truly process and express the trauma they carry. Better to maintain the silence, to keep the grief and rage locked away behind discipline and duty, than to risk becoming a danger to the very chapter they have served for so long. The impact on those who hear the testimony is equally concerning. A young space marine who hears a Heresy-Era dreadnought describe what the betrayal truly felt like, who is given an unfiltered account of the emotional devastation that came with watching brother turn against brother, might find himself questioning things that should never be questioned. He might begin to wonder if his own Primarch's loyalty is as certain as he has been taught. He might start to see potential traitors among his battle brothers, where none exist, poisoning the very brotherhood that makes the Space Marines effective. He might lose the absolute faith in the Imperium that allows him to fight without fear or hesitation, becoming paralyzed by doubt at the moment when action is most needed. The knowledge that the dreadnoughts carry is corrosive to certainty, and certainty is what the Imperium runs on. Remove that certainty, and the entire edifice of Imperial military might begin to crumble. So the Ancient Ones remain silent about the things that matter most, the experiences that have shaped them more profoundly than any battle or campaign. They speak when spoken to about tactics and history. They offer wisdom on strategy and deployment. They serve as living weapons when their chapters call upon them. But they do not speak of the heresy as they experienced it. They do not describe what it felt like in that moment, when the universe revealed itself to be fundamentally different from what they had believed it to be. They carry that burden alone, isolated not just by the armor that encases them, but by the simple fact that no one else can truly understand what they endured. Even other dreadnoughts who survived the heresy maintain their silence when they encounter one another. There is a recognition, a shared understanding that passes between ancient warriors who know that words would only diminish what they experienced. Their silence becomes its own form of communication, an acknowledgement that some things are too profound for language, too terrible for sharing, too fundamental to their identity to risk exposing to those who could never truly comprehend. This silence is also, in its own way, an act of defiance against chaos. The ruinous powers feed on emotion, on strong feelings that can be channeled and directed toward their own ends. Horn grows stronger on rage and bloodlust. Slanesh feeds on excessive sensation and obsession. Nurgle draws power from despair and resignation. Tsench thrives on scheming and the manipulation of hope. For a dreadnought to speak freely about the betrayal, to give full voice to the rage and grief and despair that they feel, would be to offer a feast to these dark gods. It would be to potentially provide an opening through which corruption could enter, not necessarily corrupting the dreadnought himself, who has survived 10,000 years without falling, but perhaps affecting those who hear the testimony, younger and less experienced warriors who might be swayed by what they hear toward the very darkness that caused the heresy in the first place. By maintaining their silence, by refusing to feed the emotional tumult within them, by giving it voice, the ancient dreadnoughts deny chaos a potential vector for corruption. There is also an element of mercy in their refusal to speak. Mercy toward themselves, in not forcing themselves to relive and articulate experiences that are agonizing even in memory, and mercy toward those who would hear them, in not burdening the younger generations with knowledge that they are not equipped to process. The Space Marines who serve in the 41st Millennium face horrors enough without adding to their burden the full emotional weight of the heresy as experienced by those who lived through it. They fight chaos in all its manifestations. They battle Xenos threats that could extinguish humanity. They struggle against the slow decay of imperial civilization, the grinding attrition that claims worlds and systems with each passing year. They do not need to also carry the psychological scars of a betrayal they did not witness, a trauma that is not theirs to process. The ancient Dreadnoughts understand this. They have watched generations of their brothers live and die. They have seen how each era brings its own challenges, its own horrors that must be endured. By keeping silent about their own deepest traumas, they allow the younger warriors to focus on the threats of the present, rather than being paralyzed by the tragedies of the past. Yet despite all these practical and psychological reasons for their silence, there is something else at work as well, something that goes deeper than protection or self-preservation, or even the limitations of language. The refusal to speak about the betrayal is, in some fundamental way, the last piece of control that these ancient warriors have over their own existence. They cannot choose when they wake or sleep. They cannot decide which battles they will fight. They cannot even control their own bodies in any meaningful sense, trapped as they are within sarcophagi that function according to machine logic rather than biological impulse. But they can choose what they will and will not speak about. They can decide which memories to share and which to keep locked away in the private chambers of their minds. This choice, this ability to say no when asked about certain things, represents the final remnant of their autonomy. Proof that despite everything that has been done to them, despite the 10,000 years they have endured in this half-life between man and machine, they are still capable of making decisions about who they are and what they will permit others to know about them. Ancient Rylanner's final confrontation with Fulgrim demonstrates this principle perfectly. After 10,000 years alone on Istvan III, after millennia of isolation that would have driven most minds to complete madness, Rylanner had every opportunity to speak of his betrayal when the demon Primarch finally arrived. Fulgrim expected stories, expected recriminations, expected some attempt to justify or explain or seek understanding. What Rylanner offered instead was silence, broken only by the activation of a virus bomb. He had no words for his former Gene Father, no lengthy speech about what the betrayal had meant to him. He had simply a final act of defiance, a rejection of everything Fulgrim had become, delivered not through testimony but through action. And even when that action failed, even when Chaos Sorcerers prevented the bomb from detonating, and Fulgrim tore what remained of Rylanor's organic body from his sarcophagus, the ancient warrior maintained his silence about the things that mattered most. He proclaimed his identity and his rejection of Fulgrim's corruption, but he did not attempt to describe what it had felt like to be betrayed by his legion, to watch his Primarch fall to chaos, to spend 10 millennia planning revenge against one he had once revered above all others. Some things, his silence said, are too sacred to share, even in defiance. Bjorn the Fell-Handed offers a different kind of example, that of the ancient warrior who has chosen to endure rather than to rage or to seek revenge. Every century when he is awakened, the Space Wolves gather to hear his stories, to learn of Leman Russ and the time before the heresy. And Bjorn speaks, sharing his memories of battles and campaigns, offering tactical wisdom gained through millennia of warfare. But he does not speak of what it felt like to be left behind when Russ departed for the Eye of Terror, though he admits to the bitterness and sense of rejection that has never truly faded. He does not describe the loneliness of being the last living connection to an age that has passed beyond all recovery. He does not put into words the slow erosion of his identity as memories fade and the organic components of his consciousness deteriorate with each passing century. These things remain his private burdens that he carries without inflicting them on those who seek his counsel. And in this silence, in this careful curation of which memories to share and which to keep locked away, Bjorn maintains his dignity and his sense of self, refusing to become merely a repository of information for others to access as they please. The silence of the Heresy-Era Dreadnoughts serves another purpose as well, one that is perhaps less obvious, but no less important. By refusing to describe what the betrayal felt like, by maintaining mystery around that central trauma, they preserve the enormity of what was lost. If they spoke freely, if they attempted to put their experiences into words, no matter how inadequate those words might be, there is a risk that the betrayal would become comprehensible, would be reduced to something that could be understood and categorized and filed away as just another piece of history. The silence prevents this domestication of trauma. It keeps the betrayal as something that exists outside normal understanding, an event so terrible that even those who experienced it cannot find words for it. This preservation of mystery, of the sense that the heresy represents something beyond normal human comprehension, serves to maintain the weight of that history, to ensure that it is never treated casually or dismissed as merely another conflict among many. Consider how humans process historical events. The further we get from something, the easier it becomes to analyze it dispassionately, to reduce it to facts and dates and strategic considerations. The First World War, with all its horror and tragedy, has become for most people a subject of academic study rather than visceral emotional experience. We can read about the trenches and the gas attacks and the millions of dead without truly feeling the weight of what that meant to those who lived through it. This is how humans cope with history, by creating distance that allows us to learn from the past without being paralyzed by it. But the heresy cannot be allowed to become just another historical event, not when it still defines the Imperium's existence 10,000 years later, not when chaos remains an active threat that continues to seek the corruption of humanity. By refusing to make their experiences comprehensible, by maintaining the silence around what the betrayal truly felt like, the ancient dreadnoughts prevent the heresy from being relegated to mere history. They keep it alive as something terrible and immediate, and beyond normal understanding, something that must be remembered not as fact, but as warning. The different responses of various dreadnoughts to their trauma also reveal something important about the nature of consciousness and identity. Some, like Relenor, channeled their anguish into focused purpose, spending 10 millennia preparing for a single moment of vengeance. Others, like Bjorn, chose stoic endurance, accepting their pain as the price of continued service while maintaining enough distance from it to function. Still others descended into madness, their minds fragmenting under the combined weight of trauma and isolation until they became more weapon than warrior, deployed only when their chapters needed raw destructive force, without discrimination. And some fell to chaos, concluding that if the universe was fundamentally chaotic and betrayal was inevitable, they might as well serve the powers that at least offered honesty about their nature, rather than maintaining the fiction of order and loyalty that had been revealed as lies. Each of these responses represents a different way of trying to survive the unsurvivable, to find meaning in experiences that defy meaning, to continue existing when existence itself has become a form of suffering. What unites all of them, regardless of how they chose to respond to their trauma, is the silence about the core experience itself. Even those who fell to chaos, who openly serve the ruinous powers and have abandoned all pretense of loyalty to the Imperium, do not speak freely about what the moment of betrayal felt like. They might justify their choice to join Horus, might explain the logical reasons why they concluded that chaos offered advantages that the Emperor could not provide, might even mock those who remained loyal for their supposed weakness or delusion. But the actual emotional experience of that moment, when brother turned on brother, when the universe revealed itself to be fundamentally different from what they had believed, that remains largely unspoken even among the corrupted. It suggests that the trauma is so profound that it transcends even the divide between loyalist and traitor, that it represents a shared experience that connects all who witnessed it, regardless of which side they ultimately chose. This brings us to perhaps the most fundamental reason why Heresy-Era Dreadnoughts will not describe what the betrayal felt like. To speak of it would be to acknowledge that it truly happened, to make it real in a way that silence does not. As long as they do not put it into words, as long as they do not attempt to convey the full emotional weight of what they experienced, they can maintain a certain distance from it, can treat it as something that happened to a version of themselves that no longer exists. The warrior who stood on Ishtvan V and watched the second wave open fire on the first, that warrior died in a very real sense, even if his body survived to be interred in a dreadnought. What emerged from that experience was something different, something that had to reconstruct its understanding of reality from the ground up, that had to find a way to continue functioning in a universe that had revealed itself to be crueler and more senseless than previously imagined. By refusing to speak of the betrayal, by maintaining silence about that transformative moment, the ancient dreadnoughts can preserve some separation between who they were before and who they became after, can avoid having to fully integrate those two versions of themselves into a coherent narrative. The silence is also a form of resistance against those who would use their testimony for purposes they do not endorse. The Imperium has constructed a mythology around the heresy, a narrative that serves the political and spiritual needs of a regime that spans 1,000,000 worlds and must maintain cohesion across distances that make direct control impossible. This mythology presents the heresy as a clear-cut battle between good and evil, between loyalty and betrayal, between the light of the Emperor and the darkness of chaos. It is used to justify the Inquisition's paranoia, the brutal suppression of anything that might be considered heretical, the constant vigilance against corruption that defines imperial culture in the 41st millennium. But the reality was messier than the myth, as reality always is, and the ancient dreadnoughts know this. If they spoke freely, if they described what they actually experienced and witnessed, their testimony might undermine the useful simplifications that keep the Imperium functioning. So they remain silent, refusing to provide ammunition for either those who would use the truth to challenge imperial authority, or those who would twist their words to support narratives they do not agree with. There is also the simple exhaustion of having survived for so long, of having carried these burdens for 10,000 years without relief or resolution. Imagine being asked, century after century, to speak about the worst experience of your existence, to relive the trauma over and over for the education of those who come after you. Imagine being expected to make sense of something that still does not make sense even after millennia of contemplation. Imagine being treated as a repository of historical knowledge when what you remember most clearly is not tactical details, but emotional devastation, when the memories that persist are precisely the ones you would most like to forget. The ancient dreadnoughts are tired, and their silence is in part simply the refusal to continue performing emotional labor for an Imperium that has given them nothing but more war, more suffering, more reasons to regret surviving when so many of their brothers found the peace of true death. Consider what it means to be the last living connection to an age that has passed beyond all recovery. Bjorn is not merely old, he is ancient, beyond the comprehension of those who wake him. He remembers the Emperor before his internment in the Golden Throne. He remembers Lemon Russ not as a legendary figure from history, but as a living, breathing person with quirks and faults and a personality that has been lost to the myth-making of later generations. He remembers the Great Crusade not as a glorious undertaking that is idealized in retrospect, but as a brutal grinding campaign that left him exhausted and wounded in body and spirit. He carries memories of a time before the Imperium calcified into the rigid, paranoid, declining civilization that defines the 41st millennium. And he can never share the full weight of what those memories mean because no one who hears them can truly understand. They have no frame of reference for what the Imperium was like before the heresy, no personal experience of what was lost when that age ended. They can only see what exists now and try to imagine what came before, and imagination is always insufficient when dealing with lived experience. This isolation, this fundamental disconnect between those who remember and those who learn about it secondhand, creates a barrier that no amount of communication can fully overcome. The ancient dreadnoughts are literally the last of their kind in ways that go beyond simply being old. They are the last who experienced the Great Crusade, not as history, but as present reality. They are the last who knew the Primarchs as living commanders, rather than legendary figures. They are the last who witnessed the transition from the Imperium of hope to the Imperium of survival, who saw the moment when the future that might have been was replaced by the grim reality that would actually unfold. And this unique position means that they are fundamentally alone in their understanding of what was lost, unable to share it with those who lack the context to comprehend it, unwilling to try when the attempt would only emphasize their isolation further. The Heresy-Era Dreadnoughts have also witnessed what happens when warriors do try to speak of unspeakable things. They have seen brothers who attempted to articulate their trauma descend into madness, as the act of speaking brought buried horrors to the surface without providing any mechanism for processing them. They have watched as younger warriors who heard unfiltered accounts of the betrayal became paralyzed by doubt or radicalized into extremism, unable to integrate what they learned into a functional worldview. They have observed how the Inquisition treats those who speak too freely about the true complexity of the heresy, how any deviation from the official narrative is treated as potential heresy itself, leading to investigations and purges and the destruction of those who were simply trying to be truthful about their experiences. These lessons have taught them that silence is not merely personally protective, but practically necessary, that speaking about certain things causes more harm than good, regardless of how pure one's intentions might be. The silence also represents a refusal to let their trauma be commodified or exploited by those who did not earn the right to hear it. The Imperium is hungry for any scrap of information from the heresy, any detail that might provide tactical advantage or historical insight or propaganda value. Tech priests want to know about the technologies that have been lost. Inquisitors want information about how corruption spreads and how to identify it early. Military commanders want tactical data from the campaigns of that era. Ecclesiarchy priests want stories that can be shaped into moral lessons for the faithful. Everyone wants something from the ancient dreadnoughts, wants them to open their memories and allow others to sift through them for useful material. But some experiences are not commodities to be extracted and traded. Some memories belong to those who lived them and no one else. By refusing to describe what the betrayal felt like, the ancient warriors maintain ownership of their own experiences, asserting that there are parts of themselves that they will not surrender, no matter how valuable others might find them. The question of language's inadequacy returns here with particular force. Even if a dreadnought wanted to describe what the betrayal felt like, even if he was willing to relive the trauma for the sake of making others understand, the words simply do not exist to convey the full scope of what he experienced. Human language evolved to describe human experiences, and even the enhanced consciousness of a space marine operates within frameworks that assume certain baseline realities. There are words for physical sensations, for emotions, for thoughts and observations and judgments. But there are no words for the sensation of having your fundamental understanding of reality inverted in an instant, for watching the impossible become inevitable, for experiencing a betrayal so complete that it calls into question everything you thought you knew about the universe and your place in it. You could spend hours listing the component emotions: rage, grief, confusion, despair, denial, horror, and 1,000 other feelings that combine to create the response to witnessing brother turn on brother. But the list is not the experience. The catalogue of feelings is not the same as the actual lived moment of the betrayal, and no matter how detailed the description, it would always fall short of conveying what actually happened in the mind and heart of a warrior who witnessed it. This is why the most honest response to the question of what the betrayal felt like is silence. Not because the ancient dreadnoughts have forgotten, not because they do not care, not because they are unable to articulate anything at all, but because silence is the only honest response to an experience that exceeds the capacity of language to contain it. To speak would be to lie, not through any intention to deceive, but simply because words would inevitably simplify and distort what actually happened, would make it seem as though it could be understood and categorized, when in truth it remains fundamentally incomprehensible even to those who lived through it. The silence acknowledges the limitation of communication while simultaneously preserving the truth of the experience as something that cannot be reduced to narrative or explanation or any other form of linguistic representation. And so the ancient dreadnoughts continue their vigil, awakened when needed to fight in battles that are merely echoes of the great conflict that defines their existence, then return to stasis to dream. Troubled dreams of a betrayal that happened 10,000 years ago, but might as well have been yesterday for all the distance time has provided from it. They speak, when spoken to, about matters of tactics and strategy. They offer wisdom, gained through millennia of warfare. They serve as living weapons in humanity's endless struggle against extinction. But they do not speak of the heresy as they experienced it. They do not describe what the betrayal felt like. They carry that knowledge alone, a burden that grows heavier with each passing century, not lighter. A wound that time does not heal, because how can time heal a wound that is continuously reopened every time they wake to find themselves still serving an Imperium that has learned nothing from its past, that continues to make the same mistakes that led to the heresy in the first place, that treats them as curiosities and weapons rather than as the traumatized survivors they truly are. The silence of these ancient warriors is sacred. It is the sound of grief too profound for words, of trauma that resists all attempts at articulation, of experiences that can only be honored through absence rather than presence. When we encounter a Heresy-Era dreadnought who will not speak of the betrayal, we are not encountering mere stubborn reticence or convenient amnesia. We are encountering the outer boundary of what language can accomplish, the point at which communication fails, not because the speaker is unwilling, but because the experience being communicated exceeds the tools available for its transmission. We are being told, through that silence, that some things are too terrible to share, too profound to reduce to narrative, too sacred to expose to the casual consumption of those who are not there and can never truly understand. In the end, the silence of the Heresy-Era dreadnoughts is not a mystery to be solved, but a boundary to be respected. They have given enough, sacrificed enough, endured enough. They have spent 10,000 years serving an Imperium that barely remembers what it was supposed to be, fighting wars that seem increasingly pointless even as they remain necessary, watching generations of their brothers live and die while they persist in their metal tombs. The least we can do is allow them to keep their deepest pain to themselves, to honor their choice to remain silent about experiences that belong to them alone. Their refusal to speak is not a failing, but a final assertion of autonomy, a statement that despite everything that has been taken from them, they still possess the power to say no, to choose what they will and will not share, to maintain some small portion of their identity as their own, rather than as property of an Imperium that sees them as resources to be exploited. If you encounter one of these ancient warriors, if you find yourself in the presence of a dreadnought who fought in the heresy and survived to tell the tale, do not ask them what the betrayal felt like. They will not answer. Not because they do not know, but because they know too well. Because the answer would require them to relive experiences they have spent 10,000 years trying to survive, because words would only diminish and distort what they carry within them. Instead, honor their service, respect their sacrifice, and accept their silence as the gift it is, the gift of being protected from knowledge that you are not equipped to process, the gift of mystery that preserves the magnitude of what was lost, the gift of their continued existence in service to an Imperium that has failed them in so many ways, but that they continue to defend because duty is all they have left. The Heresy-Era Dreadnoughts are guardians of more than just Imperial territory, or ancient technology, or tactical knowledge. They are guardians of unspoken horror, of trauma too profound to share, of the memory of a betrayal that shattered the universe but could not break their will to continue. Their silence is their strength, their refusal to speak is their resistance, and their continued service, despite everything they have endured, is a testament to a courage that goes beyond anything most of us will ever comprehend. Let us honor that by allowing them to keep their silence, by not demanding that they expose their deepest wounds for our education or entertainment or curiosity. Some things are meant to remain unsaid, and the Heresy-Era Dreadnoughts know this better than anyone. So if you've enjoyed learning about these ancient warriors and the silence they maintain around their most traumatic experiences, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. There's so much more to explore in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, and I'll continue bringing you these deep dives into the lore that makes Warhammer 40,000 such a rich and fascinating universe. Thanks for listening, and remember, in the end, we are all just trying to survive in a universe that seems designed to break us, and sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to speak and when to keep silent.